First, I want to thank Joey and Ellen Hoffman for making this event possible. I want to thank all my friends and colleagues at the Media Lab for all their concern and help. And I want to thank everyone for coming and the kindness that everyone has shown to our family. We are humbled and overwhelmed by the outpouring of support that has followed Aaron's death and are touched by how many people Aaron's life touched. It is here in my office at MIT that I'm trying to write something, and I want that won't be a jumble and confused, and there is so much I want to say, and so much of it is so difficult and contradictory. As a family, we are crushed and numb. As the denial wears off, it gets harder. I still expect to see Aaron smile, saying, "Fooled you," and I know it will never happen. The days and nights are hard. It is as if someone ripped out my heart. I have heard grief described to be like a gull covered with goo from an oil spill. It sticks to everything, it never leaves. You have heard others talk about Aaron, and there has been much written about him as a person. I want to talk about other things, but I want to describe one anecdote. Growing up, Aaron's grandfather used to talk about the John Carrar Library in Chicago. It was a public technical library, which he spent a lot of time doing research. He taught me how to use a library and do research which showed how libraries were magic portals into the knowledge of the world. Years later, when Aaron was young, the Carrar Library had moved to the University of Chicago. And although its charter said it was still public, the U of C had tried to limit access. One day, Aaron and I were at the U of C and we got in. I think I was doing some research, and I took Aaron to the stacks to show him what a wonderful place the library was. I remember clearly pulling out a book off the shelf, which turned out to be from the 1800s, expressing how marvelous this was. I would like to think that this experience made an impression on Aaron and encouraged him to make knowledge accessible and to take it out of the protected walls of libraries and then make it available to everyone, now that technology made this possible. In some way, Aaron saw that libraries had changed. I think MIT has to see that it has changed, but in the wrong way, and that it's lost its way. I love MIT, and though I've never received a degree here, I've been both an undergraduate and a graduate student, and I've worked for the Media Lab for over 10 years. I want to thank the many people who tried to save Aaron and pushed MIT tirelessly, including Joey, Larry, Tim Berners-Lee, among others. It is because of them that I have so much affection for MIT. But MIT has lost its way, and let me digress a moment. If you look at Bill Gates as an example, Microsoft Basic, their original product, was developed on machines at Harvard, which was clearly not appropriate, to use Carmen T's words. And then further work was done on the PDB-10s at the Albuquerque Public Schools, for which they had no means to allow commercial work to be done. If you look at Mark Zuckerberg, he did similar things to what Aaron did in scraping off all the information about personal information about the students at Harvard, and did other things which many people have described as at best sketchy. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak's original business was selling blue boxes, which defrauded the phone company, which there was no question was a felony. Edwin Land started his business by breaking into the labs at Columbia University. And Bob Noyce, who founded Intel and invented the planar process for semiconductors, stole a pig from the mayor of Grinnell, Iowa, and slaughtered it. And the mayor wanted him on felony charges because in Iowa stealing pigs is a felony, and was let off by having to take a semester off from school. These people became immensely wealthy and were lionized by our society. But one can imagine if they were treated as Aaron was, and crushed in the same way what might have happened. But the difference between Aaron and these people is that Aaron wasn't interested in making money. He was interested in making the world a better place. And that's why what happened to him here is even more inexplicable. These people did all exactly what MIT encouraged people to do. That is to take risk, to color outside the lines. They realized the world was changing and the existing rules no longer existed. They wanted to change the world, but today's MIT destroys those kinds of people. MIT is at its apex, and like many other institutions that could not change where the world changed, it faces the same problems. Look at Microsoft, Motorola, Kodak, and Digital Equipment Corporation, just to name a few. One has to, MIT now wants to eliminate risk and risk takers. And what happened to Aaron is not unique. I want to read this, what Bunny Wang says, who was responsible for breaking the encryption on the Xbox, and yesterday made his book about this available for free on the internet. I agreed to release this book in part because of Aaron's treatment at MIT is not unfamiliar to me. In this book, you will find a story of when I was an MIT graduate student extracting security keys from the original Microsoft Xbox. You'll also read about the crushing disappointment of receiving a letter from MIT legal repudiating any association with my work and effectively leaving me on my own to face Microsoft. The difference was that the faculty at my lab, the AI lab, was outraged by this treatment. They openly defied MIT legal and vowed to publish my work as an official AI lab memo, thereby granting me greater negotiating leverage with Microsoft. Microsoft, mindful of the potential backlash from the court of public opinion over suing a legitimate academic researcher, came to a civil understanding with me over the issue. It saddens me that America's so-called government for the people and by the people and of the people has less compassion and enlightenment toward their fellow man than a corporation. Having been a party to subsequent legal bullying by other entities, I am all too familiar with how ugly and gut-wrenching a high-stakes lawsuit can be. Fortunately, the stakes in my cases were not as high as they were, nor were my adversaries as formidable as Aaron's, or I might have succumbed to the hopelessness and the fear. A few years ago, I started rebuilding my life overseas, and I find a quantum of solace in the thought that my residence abroad makes it a little more difficult to be served. While the U.S. legal system strives for justice, the rules of the system create an asymmetric war that favors those with resources. By and far, one of the most effective methods to force a conclusion, right or wrong, against a small player is simply to believe them with resources and the will to fight through pre-trial antics. Your entire life feels like it is under an electron microscope, and every tiny blemish magnified into pitched battle of motions, counter-motions, discovery, subpoenas, and affidavits, and each action heaping tens of thousands of dollars onto your legal bill. Your friends, co-workers, employers, and family are drawn into the circus of humiliation as witnesses. Worse, you are counseled not to speak candidly to anyone, lest they be summoned as a witness against you. Isolated and afraid, it eventually makes more sense to roll over and settle than take the risk of losing on a technicality versus a better funded adversary regardless of justice. I pleaded with MIT to help Aaron, with the Chancellor and the General Counsel, Greg Morgan, as did Aaron's attorneys. They refused and hid behind delay and subterfuge. We could only get evidence from them by subpoena, but they voluntarily gave gigabytes of evidence to the prosecutor without a subpoena or warrant. MIT even broke the law. They illegally wiretapped, they violated the Stored Computer Act, and they violated the CFAA, the law that Aaron was charged under, and they even destroyed evidence. This behavior continues to this day. I cannot talk about what is in the discovery MIT gave to the prosecutor with Hal Abelson, because MIT's general counsel won't let me. Information which is integral to explain to Hal what happened. The same people who were responsible for what happened are in control and acting in the same way they did. What has happened to the MIT I love? This all fills me with sadness and dread. How can this wonderful place act so crudely? How how could they crush my son? I said to Eric Grimson, the chancellor, why are you destroying my son? He said he was not, but he was wrong. What is even more scandalous was that Aaron was innocent, and MIT knew it. Aaron was charged with unauthorized access to a protected computer, but as Tim McGovern wrote in an internal memo, which I can speak about because it's in one of the motions, and Tim McGovern was manager of network security and support service. Speaking of the MIT network, he said, no authentication of visitors. Visitor network access is provided as an on-demand self-service process to anyone who walks onto campus, plugs in, or elects to use our wireless network and declares themselves a visitor. And they get 14 days of network privileges. No identity verification. Visitors are asked to provide an email address. The email address is not used to verify that a bona fide identity exists. No authentication of users accessing JSTOR. By agreement, JSTOR allows any computer with a net 18 IP address, that's on the MIT network, to access their resources without further identification or authentication. MIT knew this, but still said it was neutral. Aaron is dead, and nothing will bring him back. My life and the life of his mother and brothers will never be whole again. A bright light that wanted to make the world a better place is gone, destroyed by brutal and cruel institutions who have no compassion. We can't bring Aaron back. He can no longer be the tireless worker for good. What we can do is change things for the better. We can work to change MIT so it no longer acts the way that it does, and once again becomes a place where risk and coloring outside the lines is encouraged, a space where the cruelties of the world are pushed back and our most creative flourish rather than being crushed. We can change the culture and the people responsible for this. We can work for the passage of Aaron's Law, changing the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act so that it can no longer be used in these cases. And MIT can use its influence to push for these changes. We can change the criminal justice system that was responsible for this outrage. And finally, MIT can use its resources and money and position to make open access to research available for everyone.